Hello and welcome to WION Live broadcast from Washington DC. I'm Nick Harper and these are the top headlines for this hour. Ukrainian President Zelensky welcomes the leaders of France, Italy, Germany and Romania to Kiev as the leaders made a high-profile visit to Ukraine as a show of support to the embattled nation and its people. NATO ministers meet to discuss the situation in Ukraine and a Latvian request for more troops, and to decide on the future military lineup on the alliance's eastern flank in response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. US lawmakers are set to focus on the pressure campaign mounted by Donald Trump against Vice President to help the defeated Republican leader overturn his 2020 presidential election defeat. The Bank of England hikes its main interest rate for a fifth straight time as it forecasts British inflation to soar further this year to above 11%. Hollywood actor Kevin Spacey denies claims that he sexually assaulted 3 men as the US star appeared in a London court to face charges. For the third time this year, the Federal Reserve has raised interest rates, and this time by 0.75%. With this, the stakes for the US economy and American consumers are high. Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell made the announcement on Wednesday, where he reiterated that they are committed to bringing inflation down.
It is essential that we bring inflation down if we are to have a sustained period of strong labor market conditions that benefit all. From the standpoint of our congressional mandate to promote maximum employment and price stability, the current picture is plain to see. The labor market is extremely tight, and inflation is much too high. Against this backdrop, today the Federal Open Market Committee raised its policy interest rate by 0.75 percentage point and anticipates that ongoing increases in that rate will be appropriate. In addition, we are continuing the process of significantly reducing the size of our balance sheet.
Well, this is the first time since 1994 that the Fed has made a 0.75% hike. It comes after last month when the Fed announced a 0.5 percentage point rise and a 0.25 point rise back in March. These rate hikes will make borrowing money for homes, cars and other purchases more expensive for consumers. It will also reduce the demand in the market and hopefully cool down the rising prices. Inflation has shot to the top of in-voter concerns in the months leading up to Congress's midterm elections in November. It's also soured the public's view of the economy and weakened President Joe Biden's approval ratings. Biden has sought to show that he recognizes the pain that inflation is causing on American households. But he's struggled to find policy actions that might make a real difference. The Fed's decision to impose a rate hike as large as it did on Wednesday was an acknowledgement that it's struggling to curb the pace and the persistence of inflation. America's inflation, like most of the world, has been worsened by Russia's war against Ukraine and its effects on energy prices. The president earlier stressed his belief that the power to curb inflation rests mainly with the Fed.
They come back to America as investment. Why should we be upset if foreigners want to invest here?
Well, New York correspondent Susan Tarani is joining us live from New York City to give us more on this. Susan, this was a very big rate rise, the biggest in nearly 30 years. But what's it likely to do, help or hurt the economy?
Right. So as you mentioned, the Fed is really trying to halt this fast-track train in what seems to be heading towards a possible recession. And, on the one hand, Jerome Powell is optimistic that by slowing the economy and raising these interest rates, it would cool down the labor market without raising unemployment rates. However, many economists are saying that's easier said than done. He says in a post-pandemic economy that will happen. We're already in a stagflation, so it's unclear whether or not, that's an optimistic view or not. But again, as you mentioned, there is no doubt anyone with a mortgage, a car loan, or even a credit card is going to feel the pinch. Just to give you an idea, if you have, for example, a 0.25 increase generally, an increase on a benchmark for an interest rates, that's $25 on $10,000 if you borrowed. So 0.75 would be $75 extra on $10,000 if you borrowed. The Fed says that it's planning on increasing its rate on a monthly basis until it cools down inflation. By early 2023, the average American would probably pay something around $230 extra on $10,000 it borrowed than it does today without raising salaries. So, we'll wait and see. The Fed has an optimistic viewpoint. American consumers are reacting in poll after poll saying that they're hurting not only at the grocery store, at gas pumps, but generally, in day-to-day living as well.
Susan, thank you. And we'll be coming back to you in a few minutes to get your take on the next story. Well, after multiple logistical challenges, the January 6th House Committee will gather once again later today for the third hearing into the Capitol siege. For this session, the focus will be on how former President Donald Trump forced then Vice President Mike Pence to reject the electoral count. There'll be 2 live witnesses present at the hearing.
In our next hearing on Thursday, the Select Committee will examine President Trump's relentless effort on January 6th and in the days beforehand to pressure Vice President Pence to refuse to count lawful electoral votes. As a federal judge has indicated, this likely violated 2 federal criminal statutes. President Trump had no factual basis for what he was doing, and he had been told it was illegal. Despite this, President Trump plotted with a lawyer named John Eastman and others to overturn the outcome of the election on January 6th. To give you a sense of the gravity of these issues, here is a clip of one of President Trump's own White House lawyers, Eric Hirschman, who talked to Mr. Eastman the day after January 6th.
Trump, along with conservative law professor John Eastman, launched a public and a private pressure campaign on Pence. And that happened just days before the Vice President was due to preside over the January 6th session to certify Joe Biden's electoral victory. The session is also expected to reveal new evidence about the dangers that Pence faced that day. On January the 6th, a mob entered the Capitol building shouting, "Hang Mike Pence." The Vice President, along with the senators, then went into hiding inside the premises.
They're getting into the Capitol tonight.
You can see Vice President Pence and his family quickly move down the stairs. The Vice President turns around briefly as he's headed down.
9 people died on the day and in the weeks after. And what was the worst attack on the US Capitol since 1814. And the Democrats argue it was all because of Donald Trump's unjustified claims of electoral fraud. Our correspondent Susan Troy is back with us from New York to talk more about this story. Susan, the attention today turns very much to Mike Pence and that pressure campaign. What can we expect to come out of this hearing?
Right. This is a day, really, as you mentioned, will be focused on the vice president and how he did not agree to not certify the election results. And, we are expected to see, as we saw sort of snippets of unprecedented photos of Mike Pence and his family in hiding in a safe space during that day. Where the rioters, a number of them, were looking for him and shouting, "Hang Mike Pence," and where he was, sort of taken into that place, him, and, he was sort of reunited with his family. It'll be interesting, to see his lawyers take on what happened from their perspective. These are information that we haven't heard before from Mike Pence's side. He's been mum for the most part regarding this issue. And also, it'll be interesting to find out, to what extent, there has been talk, and we have information about how he called the National Guards, to what extent Donald Trump was involved in calling the National Guards to dispel the rioters. But then after that, what took place. So I think it'll be an important day, and a lot of information will come out of it.
Susan Tarani joining us live from New York City. Thanks, as always, for your time. Well, next today, Donald Trump scored a significant victory in South Carolina without even contesting himself. This as 8 of his preferred candidates won their primaries in the state. Trump-backed candidates also won in Nevada and North Dakota. Russell Fry, who Trump supported, convincingly ousted Tom Rice, who was a 5-term representative and had voted to impeach Trump last year. Another Trump-backed Republican candidate, Tim Scott, coasted to an easy and unopposed primary win in South Carolina as well. These wins will likely give a massive boost to Trump's confidence and serve as a measure of revenge, especially against Tom Rice. However, Nancy Mace, who was another one of Trump's key targets, managed to hold back her challenger and retain her seat. Mace had criticised Trump after the Capitol riot, claiming that his legacy was wiped out after the attack. Meanwhile, in Nevada, another one of Trump's picks, Adam Laxalt, walked away with a win. He defeated a populist candidate, retired Army Captain Sam Brown. Trump-backed candidates also picked up 2 wins in North Dakota. Next today, the whiskey war over an Arctic island has now officially ended. We're talking about the 49-year feud between Denmark and Canada. A 1.2 square kilometre island was at the centre of a territorial dispute, which has been resolved in a historic way. Hans Island is situated at an equal distance between Greenland and Canada's Ellesmere Island. Greenland is an autonomous territory within the Kingdom of Denmark. Now, neither country knew about the other's claims to the island until a bilateral meeting was held back in 1971 to discuss territorial boundaries. The NATO allies have squabbled over the island since the 1980s. But it wasn't a war that was fought with weapons. In many ways, it was the friendliest of all possible wars. There were diplomatic protests, online campaigns, and even a Canadian call to boycott Danish pastries. Scientists and soldiers from Denmark and Canada who visited the island would take it in turns to remove the other country's flag and then raise their own. Even visitors would leave a bottle of either Canadian whiskey or Danish schnapps for their rival to find on their next visit. Many called it the Whiskey War. But the tussle has now been resolved. The two sides formally announced a deal at a signing ceremony in Ottawa, with the Canadian and Danish foreign ministers present. The two countries have agreed to divide the tiny uninhabited island between themselves. So they'll split Hans Island and effectively create the first land border between Canada and Europe. With the deal, Canada and Denmark have established the world's longest maritime border of over 3,800 kilometres. The two foreign ministers exchanged what they called the final bottles of Danish-Canadian whiskey war. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau called it a historic milestone in the relationship between Canada and the Kingdom of Denmark. At a time when global security is being threatened, diplomatically dividing up the island serves as perhaps a model for how to peacefully resolve territorial disputes. The two nations have successfully demonstrated how long-standing disputes can be resolved peacefully. As the Danish Foreign Minister put it, Canada and Denmark's experience should inspire other countries to follow the same path. A US-based think tank has said that North Korea seems to be increasing the work at its nuclear test site to include a second tunnel. This follows continued reiteration from South Korean and US officials who believe that North Korea might conduct a nuclear test on any given day. Citing commercial satellite imagery, the Centre for Strategic and International Studies said in a report that preparation work at the nuclear test facility's tunnel number 3 was apparently complete. It added that the facility was ready for a possible nuclear test. The research group also said that analysts have spotted new construction activity at the facility's tunnel number 4 for the first time, which they feel is a strong indication that the country is trying to prepare itself for a potential testing in the future. North Korea conducted 6 underground nuclear tests at the site between 2006 and 2017, but the 2 tunnels were never used for nuclear tests, and their entrances were demolished back in 2018. This happened when Pyongyang declared a self-imposed suspension on testing nuclear weapons and its intercontinental ballistic missiles. However, leader Kim Jong-un has now said that he is no longer bound by the suspension, since the US has failed to reciprocate well during denuclearization talks. And with this, North Korea resumed testing ballistic missiles at the start of this year. Meanwhile, South Korea says that it has been closely monitoring developments in the North's nuclear activity. Seoul added that any provocation by North Korea, including a nuclear test, would be met with a united, firm response from the United States and South Korea. The South Korean foreign minister has also urged China, which has been the only major ally of North Korea for many years, now to try and use its influence. The minister also vowed to work to normalise an intelligence-sharing pact with Japan as soon as possible, in order to boost their responses to North Korea's nuclear and missile threats. To get us more on this, our Tokyo correspondent Phoebe Amoroso brings you these details.
The latest is that there is fresh activity at the Pyongyang nuclear facility test site, and it seems that North Korea is working on the number 4 tunnel at that site. And the reports that we have been hearing for weeks have related to the number 3 tunnel, in which preparations look to be complete, that the North could be ready at any moment to conduct a nuclear test. And that site was used for several nuclear tests between 2006 and 2017, 6 underground nuclear tests. But in 2018, North Korea very dramatically and very publicly, inviting the world to watch, blew up the entrances to those tunnels. Now, earlier this year, we heard from Pyongyang, from Kim Jong-un, that he's no longer abiding by the self-imposed moratorium, and that was to not conduct any nuclear tests or intercontinental ballistic missile launches. We have seen some ICBM launches this year, and he's been quite explicit in how the US is not keeping up its side of the deal, at least from Kim Jong-un's perspective, that the US is not making enough efforts towards denuclearization talks. And so this is why potentially we're seeing increased activity, preparing for another nuclear test. But yes, the world is still watching and waiting to see how this situation develops.
Hollywood actor Kevin Spacey was granted unconditional bail today after appearing in a London court on 4 charges of sexually assaulting 3 men. The 62-year-old is also facing a 5th charge of causing a man to engage in penetrative sexual activity without consent. The 2-time Oscar winner has strenuously denied all charges against him. Spacey will next appear at Southwark Crown Court on July the 14th for a plea and trial preparation hearing. Deputy Chief Magistrate Tan Erkan said he did not believe Spacey posed a flight risk and was therefore able to move freely in the run-up to his trial. Spacey, who's known for starring roles in American Beauty, The Usual Suspects and House of Cards, had previously said he would travel to the UK to face the charges. Once one of Hollywood's biggest and most bankable stars, Spacey's career ground to a halt after actor Anthony Rapp first went public with allegations about his sexual conduct in 2017. A series of other complaints followed in both the US and the UK. In Britain, Spacey was the artistic director of London's Old Vic Theatre from 2003 to 2015, but in November 2017, the theatre company revealed it had received 20 allegations of inappropriate behaviour against him. Like Spacey, last week, former Hollywood mogul Harvey Weinstein was also charged in the UK, with 2 counts of indecent assault against a woman in London in August 1996. He's currently serving a 23-year prison sentence in LA over separate offences. Youth Day in South Africa commemorates the Soweto youth uprisings of June the 16th, 1976. In 1975, protests started in South African schools following a directive from the then Bantu Education Department that said that Afrikaans had to be used as an equal basis with the English as the language of instruction in secondary schools. WION's Kalden Ongmu reports.
June 16th is an important day in the history of South Africa. Youth Day, as it is popularly known, is a day on which South Africans honour fallen heroes. Mainly the youth ambushed by the apartheid regime's police in Soweto on the 16th of June 1976. On this day, black students protested against discrimination and an order requiring black students to be taught in Afrikaans, a language they associated most closely with apartheid.
Well, I was 17 years old in 1976, my matric year. And in fact, I was here in Soweto when the first students' uprising occurred. And that marked the turning point for South Africa in terms of the politic of the day. And it already marked the demise and the fall of the oppressive apartheid regime.
46 years have passed, and South Africa is a free country now. It is important to evaluate whether the youth of today enjoy the fruits of what the youth of 1976 sacrificed.
Now it's that the youth is doing something for themselves right now. I would say we're having our own fights right now. Since our parents and grandmothers were fighting that time, I don't think we're getting what we deserve to get right now. Opportunities, works, even economically struggling. So I don't think we do enjoy the fruits of what our parents did.
So we don't have freedom. We don't see any freedom at all because we are unemployed people. And then we are here fighting for our rights. We are still fighting for our rights. We are still fighting. So that means there's no freedom. If we are still fighting, it means there's no freedom.
Youth Day is a celebration of youth, a reminder of how young people can impact the world. South Africans look back on this day not only to reflect on how far they have come, but to remind each other to keep moving forward, because there is a long way to go.
We have high unemployment rates, which is something that the government has to deal with, because youth being unemployment, while they have a lot of potential within themselves to bring South Africa to become a better country.
The 1976 Soweto uprising has proven that young people have the power, the spirit, and the potential to shape the future.
The 1976 Soweto uprising has proven that young people have the power, the spirit, and the potential to shape the future. Therefore, the opportunities which young people now have can only be sustained if all sectors of the society join hands to support youth development. This is Kalden Ongmu from Johannesburg, South Africa, for WION World is One.
Well, finally today, as Ukraine battles months of war, civilians are using art as an inspiration to stand united against the war. What months of war have destroyed is now being restored by art and murals. We leave you with these visuals. I'm Nick Harper in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.
This is right, Arab.